Hello! This video is part of a series of resources for Texas property owners. My name is Pat O'Connor with O'Connor & Associates, and the topic for this video is, should you accept the offer at the informal hearing? And as you're probably aware, there's 3 steps in the tax appeal process: the informal hearing, the formal hearing, which is also known as the Appraisal Review Board hearing or the ARB, and the 3rd step, which is binding arbitration or litigation in district court. So if you accept the offer at the informal hearing, you're done for the year. So we're going to consider that you have filed a protest and you have asked the appraisal district for their evidence, and they've given you a copy of their evidence, and now you've looked at the comparable sales and to determine if you are overvalued on market value, and you have done your own research on the appraisal district's website to see if you're unfairly taxed on unequal appraisal based on your neighbors. So now you are ready to go at the informal hearing. So we're going to consider 2 options. The first is that you get a good offer, and this happens quite frequently at the informal hearing. And the second is you don't get a good offer at the informal hearing. So let's say you get a good offer at the informal hearing. Well, my suggestion for the vast majority of cases is take it. Accept the offer and move on and finalize your appeal for the year. And there's 2 reasons for this. The first is an offer at the informal hearing is not binding on the Appraisal Review Board or ARB. So just because you get a good offer at the informal hearing doesn't mean it will be available or the starting point for the formal hearing. In some cases it is, it varies county by county, but if you get a good offer, it may not be available at the formal hearing. And the second is, in many cases, you're going to have to come back a second time. We do a large volume of appeals up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and in Dallas County, many taxpayers come in early before May 31st to do the informal hearing. And if they don't resolve the appeal there, then they have to file a protest by May 31st, and Dallas will schedule a formal hearing for June, July, or August. So you'll have to come back on a second trip. So both you reduce the uncertainty by locking in the offer, and secondly, you save yourself a trip if you accept a reasonable offer at the informal hearing. Now let's say there's not a reasonable offer. Perhaps they offer 0 or something that just seems stingy. So what do you do then? Well, consider the options for going to the Appraisal Review Board. If you go to the Appraisal Review Board, there's really 3 possible outcomes. There's a 70% chance, based on the Texas Comptroller data for 2015, that you will get a reduction at the Appraisal Review Board hearing. Those are great odds. Wouldn't you love odds like that in Las Vegas? More than 2 out of 3 win. So those are good odds. Now the second chance is there's about a 30% chance you will not get a reduction at the Appraisal Review Board hearing. And there's a very small chance they're going to increase your value at the Appraisal Review Board hearing. This happens so infrequently that I would encourage you not to consider it a realistic probability. So really think of it as 70% chance of getting a reduction at the Appraisal Review Board hearing, and a 30% chance of not getting a reduction at the Appraisal Review Board hearing. So if you've gone to the informal hearing and you have a good case, one other factor you need to be aware of is that you have to go to the Appraisal Review Board hearing to maintain your right to file for either binding arbitration or litigation. And many appraisal districts will not consider valid unequal appraisal evidence at either the informal hearing or the formal hearing. And unfortunately, many of the ARBs just go along with what the appraisal districts request on unequal appraisal. So if you have a great case on unequal appraisal, go to the Appraisal Review Board hearing, and if you don't get a reasonable result, then strongly consider filing for binding arbitration. But you have to attend the ARB hearing to maintain your right to file for binding arbitration. we've done a large volume of binding arbitration cases for the 2016 tax year, and our experience is that the arbitrators do understand and consider unequal appraisal. So it's really the first chance in the process to have a fair venue for unequal appraisal. The other issue that happens is sometimes appraisal districts have very insular thinking on which comp should be used for market value, whereas the realtors who do most of the binding arbitrations are much more open-minded on considering which comps are reasonable to consider. So a second possibility is if you got an unreasonable result at the appraisal review board on market value, that's another good time to consider binding arbitration. To find out if you're fairly taxed based on unequal appraisal, go to the Texas Fairness Checker at cutmytaxes.com. It's free, takes less than a minute, and requires no personal information. And you'll find out almost instantly if you're fairly taxed or not based on unequal appraisal. That's cutmytaxes.com. This is Pat O'Connor with O'Connor & Associates, and we'll be back soon with more tips on reducing your property taxes.